This is the Liberal Europe podcast by ELF, bringing liberal ideas into the political debate, with Leszek Jazdzewski and Ricardo Silvestre.
Hi, this is Leszek Jazdzewski. Welcome to Liberal Europe. Today we are talking about the Israeli-Iran conflict. We are really taking a deep dive into the Iranian side, and for this reason I invited Dr. Walter Posch, who is a trained orientalist and works as a Middle East expert at the Institute for Peacekeeping and Conflict Management at the National Defense Academy in Vienna. He speaks Farsi. He's an expert in the security forces and Iranian regime, and therefore also we decided to publish a link to his analysis of Iranian security apparatus because of the very dynamic situation on the ground, as you know, and also because of some technical issues, we had to slightly edit our conversation. So just to let you know, my first question to Dr. Posch was why it is so difficult for Iran to come back to negotiation table with the Israeli and especially Americans.
I think there, other than the historic legacy between the two countries, there is one technical and one political aspect which makes it very hard for either side to come back to the negotiations table. First, the positions and the points of departure of both sides are very far away. Iran made it clear from the beginning that zero enrichment is not an option, whilst the Americans themselves, in the last statements, insisted on zero enrichment. Now, there is also this aspect, the way the Americans negotiate, for instance, with the special negotiator, Mr. Witkoff, who's a very capable person, I'm sure. However, there's a long history of Iranian international nuclear negotiations, and Iran shows up with a team including very experienced technocrats and nuclear scientists to begin with. So you may be a great businessman and a great negotiator, but I doubt it that it will be easy if you don't have someone like Mr. Tahranji on board on your side, who understand the minutiae of negotiating a very, very delicate nuclear deal with all the technical loopholes and details, etc. Having said this, there is a second aspect. From now, I'm only quoting the Iranian understanding of events. When you were preparing these negotiations, Israel attacked and attacks and kills, among others, your nuclear negotiators. Iran let its guard down because they thought when they are negotiating with the Americans, there will be no attack on them because Trump will never allow, out of dignity, that a third party would dare to interrupt a bilateral talk or negotiation. And so they're puzzled whether perhaps the Americans have been double-crossed from the beginning. Whether this is true or not, it is certainly an option as seen from the Tehrani perspective, especially given the fact that so many of the nuclear negotiators are dead now. So restarting it will take a lot of political will and increasingly also courage on behalf of the Iranian negotiators teams. I mean, if you expose yourselves and then you even get attacked at home with about 16 neighbors who are uninvolved dying with you. So that's a real heavyweight to restart it. On the other hand, all the other options like non-negotiating or doubling down or even going so far as to attack American troops or whatever we have heard is even more riskier and most certainly will lead to the very kind of confrontation Iran always avoided. And interestingly, Mr. Trump said, and even Mr. Vance both said, their war is with the Iranian nuclear program. This is really only about the nuclear program and not about anything more. So The question is now, how can they restart these talks, given the fact that there is no more EU mechanism where the EU in crisis would jump in and make it possible for all sides involved to talk to each other directly or indirectly.
So that's very interesting. This sort of diplomatic process that might be restarted, but as for now, it seems that Israel is in control of the skies over Iran. Maybe it's not total control, but they seem to be hitting different targets. They hit the prison. They hit, obviously, with the help of Americans, the nuclear side. So Americans hit them directly. What I mean, I wonder to what extent this means that Iran is trying to mobilize the society against big Satan and the small Satan. And that means it's like a total mobilization. That means the country is actually ready for confrontation. Or to what extent do you think it might be rather undermining the legitimacy of the regime? This is what clearly Donald Trump has in mind, even though thinking that bombs can do regime change is seems like a total fantasy. What do you think is the Iranian regime options vis-a-vis its society?
Well, there are many options. First of all, let's get some points clear. Israel is controlling the skies via its air force. That is absolutely true. But on the other hand, what does control over skies mean when the opposite side is capable to launch sophisticated missiles against your territory and harm your infrastructure in ways that have never been occurred until now? I mean, whatever, we never saw such a destruction, not even with the 6 Days War, never when the Syrians attacked Israel in the early 70s. What Iran, the harm and the damage Iran is inflicting right now on Israel, also on its self esteem, is rather high because it is really tough, I would say. That's the first point. The second point is political language is going away from the revolutionary big Satan, small Satan, anti imperialism, and so on to national defense. This is why the legal aspect is so important. This is why the army is leading. This is why the language is this is our home country, we've been attacked, and so on. So, and the Iranians were capable in the last week to detect a lot of sabotage groups who cooperated with the Israelis or with elements of the Israeli security apparatus. This may sound not a big deal, but it's big enough for them to show that they are in command and in charge. And after a first wave of shocks, like there was some attack on the water facility in Tehran and car bombs detonating, Tehran seems to be having been capable of maintaining the order for the time being. This may explain why the last attacks of the Israelis have been tougher and more hurting and psychologically for Iranians more devastating. What was not so devastating was very interesting. These were the American attacks on the nuclear sites, because as I mentioned, it's hard to believe that there's any technician was there, and no casualties. So yes, the damage is certainly big, but beyond that, now the last discussions are how much of their enriched uranium the Iranians brought to another secure place. So this might be, under other circumstances, this might have been a minor success, but given the damage inflicted by the Israelis on Iran, Tehran can simply not declare victory. On the other hand, Israel too cannot declare victory and say, now we leave it. Obviously, to the big surprise of many military experts, neither side is running out of missiles, because we heard so the Iranians would not have that many, not so many sophisticated missiles. And on the opposite side, it was said, well, Israel is just running out of missiles. Maybe one day, but certainly not before this conflict ends.
But do you think, because I'm curious about this reaction of society, what do we know? It's it's tightly controlled society, and obviously one has to be very careful analyzing information flowing out of the country. But how can we assess the situation of society reaction. It's like a gathering around the flag because this is the attack on the country, not just the regime, but the country as such. That means that the whole discussion of undermining the regime by those attacks seems to be false. Or do you think that the fact that they cannot defend not just the major sides but also themselves is undermining the power, because the autocratic regime in the end relies on the power of control and retaliate against the enemy? What's your assessment?
Yeah, first, the society is, especially the secular part of the Iranian society, does not want anything to do with the regime and certainly not with Mr. Netanyahu, who's kind of a villain for many in the Middle East. On the other hand, the real opposition groups, those with connections to other countries, those who are capable to pick up arms and so on, are mostly Sunni fundamentalists, and they are sympathizers so much with the Palestinians that they would not, and in their declarations, they would go for the defense of the Iranian homeland. That's the so to speak more radical opposition. The broader picture is, however, that the regime has lost a lot of credibility already in the last years, and especially the Iranian security apparatus, and therein the Revolutionary Guards are in rather big trouble from the viewpoint of the society. First, because you can see this because the numbers of the volunteers dropped dramatically. Secondly, if you just look at the blunders where the Revolutionary Guards bear their sole responsibility, shooting down a civilian airliner because you insist on an unexperienced crew of air defense Revolutionary Guards units. 4 years ago, shoot the strange accident of of the former president Raisi, where the Revolutionary Guards were responsible for his technical security, the killing of Ismail Haniya, a state guest, in a high security compound of the Revolutionary Guards. This is quite a lot. This would be a lot for any country if there's a certain unit responsible for all of this, and this is more than just raising the need to reform them, but almost to be more serious with them, and going so far as to really seriously restructure. And they were restructured already in the last years 3 times. And to this add their privileged status vis-a-vis the ordinary military, which kept its reputation and its tradition intact. I mean, basically, this is the old Iranian army, apolitical, and they command a little bit respect. The system itself is now in a phase where they've walked through the same crisis like the last years of the Shah, where societal questions are expressed in antipathy towards the leadership, but the questions are much bigger. How do you deal fairly with a multi-ethnic and multi-confessional society? You don't see it. Yes, we all know Iran is a Shiite Persian, but then you have 50 or 55% Persians. The rest are what? Our concept of minority clearly doesn't work in Iran, but there are different ethnicities. So what's the answer? The last one who tried to give a better answer than the previous regime was Hassan Rouhani, who tried to make it a more democratic and inclusive and so on. But his papers remained academic and had no political traction. The question of the Sunnis, it's very strange that we have a correlation between women's rights and the rights of confessional minority, because the real tolerance is when you really say we don't care. As a state, you can prescribe. You can say, well, in official offices, women must wear a veil because this is whatsoever. You can do that, but in private life, in public life, you should not. They insisted to do so because this is a stalwart of their religiosity, of a certain middle class, and the symbol of the revolution. On the other hand, you deny half of the population the right of a choice. It's not so much telling them what to wear, it's about the right of the choice. And you now have Muslim and Islamist women who would say, well, I would like to have this right of a choice, and I want my sisters to have this too. Um, Even a marginal figure like former President Mr. Ahmadinejad came up and said, well, it should be the woman who decides. And at the same time, when you're complaining about discrimination of Muslims worldwide, you don't have the stomach as an Islamic republic, Islamic, not Shiite, to allow the Sunnis to have a big mosque in Tehran. I mean, you have, of the 95 million people, are at least 30 million Sunnis. It's a huge amount, or let it be 25 or 20, but it's a huge amount. And not only ethnic minorities like Baloch and Turkoman and Kurds and so on, or Sunnis and some of the Arabs, but also there's a lot of Sunni Persians, especially in eastern Iran. So these tensions and these problems come to the fore whenever the Iranian regime is in a crisis, and they are clearly in crisis modus. The current tensions help them a little bit because they can change on the national defense narrative and the patriotic narrative, but that works maybe a month. Let it be long enough if the pain is if it's not too painful for the population. But problems are just delayed. And at the same time, with the current leadership, with an octogenarian revolutionary leader, even if he wanted to, he will not be the person to change Iran and to juvenile it and to do the necessary reforms. And given the longevity of the current regime, its weaknesses and its strengths are ingrained within the state structure right now. So state reform, regime reform go hand in hand now, which is you cannot say this is the party which does so and we kick out the party members and then we put in new people and the state structure remains. So any reform would be painful anyway in Iran, if it's working on a peaceful level on their own pace or whether it's imposed. And it seems to me that all the political elites shy away, and the Iranian population, because they've been cut out all the time, be they intellectuals, technocrats, whatsoever, although they tried their best to make the Islamic Republic a more rational and a more livable place, they never had the say equivalent to their importance. And this tension now comes to fruition, and it comes in eruptions regularly. And these eruptions come the less foreign pressure exists. If they're left alone, we saw this after a phase of relative calm, when a small incident, because so many people die in Iranian prisons, of one woman, just you could see it. We have it enough. Once again, a girl killed in the police station and so on. This was 3 years ago with Mahsa Jina Amini, where everything erupted out of a sudden. Not in the sense of that there's a coordinated revolutionary or anti-regime movement. What I found so striking inside Iran, people were so disgusted and told their disgust. Stop this useless killing. Stop behaving like this. People didn't even bother to come up with we are revolutionaries, we want to overthrow the system. They said, no, you just behave. You just behave. And I think that's much more and a newer civic approach than we saw in early years. And now, with all this ongoing crisis, this is a little bit in a hiatus and it's waiting a little bit. But it's coming back. It's coming back again with any person tortured, with anyone. So even if the regime may say, now we have credible proof that here and there are spies and so on, maybe or maybe not. I don't know the cases for sure. And it's sure that Iran is a prime target of the international intelligence world. But even so, the ordinary dysfunctionality is reminiscent, which we saw in so many places in Europe all along, when an ideological regime which was started with young firebrands gets old and simply nasty. If you see young Mr. Khamenei, sometimes his speech is smart, but in a way naive about in the Manichaean terms of the world. it's a little bit, when you see the footage of Cuba in the 1960s, the attraction, especially for Western intellectuals, is very high. When you see them in the 2000s, you need a lot of Buena Vista Social Club to make it bearable, because it's so sad. You see how much the country stayed behind. And you have a similar situation in Iran. And tragically, I always would say Iran had its Dubček moment. It didn't need the Soviets, but it was under Khatami, and it was the same well-intended Dubček is kind of how make it nicer, how make it more livable, but it's still an ideological system which loses its meaning as soon as you get loose and as you allow more voices and more forces to get a hold on the power. The Shah had the same problem when he created the one-party state, the Rastakhi's party, and they're in the same problem now.
I think you described a really interesting process that might in the future be taking place in Iran. What I'm curious of, you mentioned some revolutionary analogies, Dubček and Castro brothers and so on. I'm curious whether a sort of Gorbachev moment wouldn't be a sort of oxymoron in this case, because you described exactly the situation in which any sort of meaningful reform would undermine the very legitimacy of the regime and the very roots of the regime. So I'm curious in what sort of language, in what sort of narrative this opening or reform is possible, because it seems there is, at least from the outside, very little legitimate alternatives to the Islamic Republic. To what extent people still think and talk in the terms established, more than 80 years, more than 40 years ago, and to 45. And to what extent do you think there is an alternative? I don't speak of liberal democracy as we know in the Western countries, but any sort of alternative to Islamic Republic. Do you think it is viable to consider such options in the future after those hostilities stop one way or another, or do you think it's very far fetched?
I don't think it's far fetched. I think the question will come up. I hope it will come up inside Iran, formulated by young Iranians or by Iranian technocrats, by Iranians of all layers of the society, and it goes their own path. You don't need a fantastic constitution. It's much more important that misuse and abuse in prisons, etc., stops. Iran has other problems, like relatively, it's close to Afghanistan with its drug centers and so on. So you understand why Iranians are often ambivalent. On one hand, needing a strong security system, because obviously such a big country would need it. On the other hand, fearing it. And you have, of course, this authoritarian tradition. But let me make one point clear, given the history of the faulty but still vibrant Iranian parliamentarian system, if not democracy. The Iranians always had this point of national sovereignty and democracy going hand in hand. They always, even if you listen to some of the opposition figures, they always describe the current regime as a foreign implant, maybe going out of control, but being handpicked by the West to subdue the Iranian left and whatsoever. Others would say Khamenei was in Russia for a while, so he is. And all the, you see, the high nationalism, not in the sense of ethnic superiority of one group, but in the sense of independence in a very classic, and I wanted to say naive, but that's not the correct word, rather un-European way, because we Europeans are used to have our national sovereignty, but to share it in a common destiny with other countries. I would say, as an Austrian, this time voluntarily, because sometimes in the old imperial system you will have it voluntarily. With Iran, it is, when I talk to Iranian Democrats, people who are democratically minded, they would always jump between two extremes. On one hand, they would say, with Western help, we could get this and that and that, and get away of the current regime. On the other hand, they say, but there must be no foreign interference. And that's a contradiction in terms. So, in a way, I would say you don't have a Masaryk-like figure who would be able to negotiate, to understand the international political system, to formulate what is national destiny right now. So this is all missing because the intellectual tradition is not there. And at the same time, you have at least half of the population which is conditioned by two pillars. One is the Iranian nationalism in the old tradition of Reza Khan, so very 1930s thin-skinned nationalism, and often the same people. Ahmadinejad was a good example for them. In the Islamic tradition, you are actually, we are Muslims. Actually, we belong to others. Actually, we go to Makkah and Medina, to Karbala and whatsoever. And this is quite an interesting in-between position of Iranian nationalism / Islam, which is very different to, say, the situation in Turkey, although it's comparable. The democracy debate is much, if it's not well managed and with Iranian ownership well managed, is potentially dangerous because it easily can lead to local separatisms. In the sense of, we're going to run our affairs here. I'm coming from a very strong, from a province with strong identity myself, so I know this immediate reaction. What do we need, the people of the capital and so on? That might be romantic in a wealthy European country where people have everything, but it might be potentially dangerous when people of the neighboring village speak another language. You're always in competition because you think they get more than I get, and so on. And this brings me back to this core question of, it's not ethnicity, but the Iranian regionalism, how the center and periphery system in Iran is managed. And less than going for a wonderful on the book constitution or so, it's more about the practice, how the Iranians would like to do it right now, and the practice within the given system, because the provincial system they have now, not the number of provinces, but the relationship between province and government and central state, is basically the same since 1920. So here the state is very concerned. That is irrelevant of the nature of the regime. But the nature of the regime, you can change in one way. And this is, I think, where I see the only role of the West to comment. And this is about torture and misuse and political prisoners. This is the good old classic liberals. Regardless what you are, you do, what you did or you say, we don't care. But you, a human being, does not serve such a treatment. And you would be surprised. There's a lot of mullahs in Rome who would agree with that. Agreeing in a conference is one thing, and going then and really repairing the misuse in the judicial system is another thing. But there are international mechanisms, and you don't have to go for a complete security sector reform, but you can go for a prisons reform. You can. It's not normal that Iran holds the record almost on executions, especially given the case that most executions are with ethnic minorities. So why should the minority of 5% of the nation have 40% of the executed? I don't want to go to become too cynical and compare it to certain Western countries where we have in one peculiar place an almost similar execution pattern. But this is a problem, and I think that the Iranians are very much aware of it and want to change this. Once you change this, once you get the violence out of the systems, well, then you have to debate differently. The candidates, at least Iran has elections, whether they're good, the vetting system, and so on. Then you can go for more basic topics, and this is not so much about the religion and state coming together. It's more about this idea that the head of the state is also his supreme judge. I think that's the core problem. It has not whether people are religious or not in Iran. In some regions are very religious, some regions are absolutely not. That's something else. But the obvious failure of the current legal system concerning constitutional law, so that is an ironic repetition of the imperial system, where the Shah said, well, with this constitution, I cannot modernize the country. And so he put the constitution out of order. Now you have the same powerful figure, not the Shah, but the Wali Fekh, who says, well, I'm my own constitutional judge, and I interpret what right and wrong. And you are in this mixture where you say, well, it's a total different system, but the problem is the same, like the previous system. It sounds very Islamic now, but obviously it's just a question of authoritarian rule, and it's extremely convenient when you are the strong man in the place and you are a judge, president, defense minister, and whatsoever in one person.
Right. I think we'll have to stop in this very interesting moment since we went over time. But I must say that what you explained very insightfully, and I thank you for this, is that first of all, it's absolutely necessary that we in the West, in Europe, we understand the people and the regime, which perhaps we often misunderstand, and also that there is a possibility of change within society, even so tightly controlled as the Iranian one. So I wanted to thank you, Walter Posch, for being with us today with the Liberal Europe podcast. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, we'll be watching the developments in Iran very carefully. Thank you again. That's all for today for Liberal Europe from me. Please tune in for Ricardo Silvestre next week. Until 2 weeks. Goodbye.
You were listening to the Liberal Europe podcast by the European Liberal Forum. This podcast was co-financed by the European Parliament.